Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences back into the forum for this session entitled The Academy 364 Days of the Year. We're very honored to have newly elected President of the Academy, John Bailey, with us today, and also Kimberly Pierce, Governor of the Academy and award-winning director. And they will both be interviewed by Jay Weisberg, film critic for Variety. Please give them a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Jinan. Just briefly, I want to talk about how we'll structure this. We're going to talk about, obviously, 364 days of the year, what the Academy does besides the Oscars, the importance of that. We'll also talk then about how the Academy is opening itself up to diversity, to voices outside of the United States, and also, obviously, how the foreign Oscar submissions work. I'd like to maybe have the three of us have this sort of discussion for let's say, for about the first half an hour, and then open it up for the audience. So we very much want this to be a conversation. Please do ask questions and help to make this a more kind of responsive event. So thank you very much for coming. Welcome. As I said, I think maybe the best thing right now is just to launch into what the Academy does besides the Oscars.
Let me just give you a very brief capsule history of the Academy. We're celebrating our 90th year this year, and the logo that you will see as you start to see promotion for it has a 9 and a 0, and the 0 becomes the O for Oscar. And our perspective for the telecast and the publicity around it is going to be a retrospective look at 90 years of international and American cinema as reflected in the Oscars. So the actual telecast show is not going to be only about the pictures that are, being honored this year, but it's going to be a real look back at the entire history from the late silent era to today, and we're very excited about that, and we're planning on having a lot of clips and representatives from international cinema, and possibly cut away several times. This is all very much still as an idea in development. Cut away to Oscar parties being hosted in different countries around the world. So we'll see. It's something very much I want to do. Before I became president, I was vice president for 3 years. And one of my responsibilities was as the chair of an oversight committee on preservation and history. So cinema history has been very, very interesting. I've been very interested in it since I was a film student. And if you were here on Friday, I did a discussion, I think, was it in this room? Anyway, I did a discussion here with Nabil Ayosh, who I've been a big fan of his since I saw Horse of God, which was a Moroccan submission for the Foreign Language Film Award 5 or 6 years ago, I think, yeah. And he has a new film that's at the festival here, Razia, which is a really marvelous film. I think it's being shown again tomorrow night if you didn't see it last night. So, the Academy has been widely perceived, I think, by the world in most of its history as kind of a Hollywood bubble, an enclave of the privileged that was constantly navel-gazing at itself and its own self-importance. That has been changing for some time, and it's going to change a lot more. All of us on the Board of Governors, I think, are very much committed to the spirit of diversity and inclusion, not just in terms of ethnicity and gender and religion among Western members, but also in terms of international outreach around the world. And we have several new members that actually are here at this festival. Nabil is a new member. I've been to several film festivals recently and have encountered new members there. We were in Madrid for a new members reception several months ago, and I met a cinematographer. I'm a cinematographer, so I especially am aware of new members in the cinematographer's branch. And I met a man I'd been emailing with, Jose Luis Alquena, who has been photographing a film in Madrid for the Iranian director Asghar Farhadi, who won the Academy Award last year for his film Salesman. And Jose Luis had photographed several films for Pedro Almodovar, very well known. Anyways, the man, he's got like about 160 credits to his name, 160 credits. He's 79 years old, and he's a new member. You know, so that's the guy. We're casting a wide net. We're looking for young people, people mid-career, and people like me that are, you know, sort of more than mature in their career. Also, when I was at the Morelia Film Festival, I met a young director named Tatiana Hueso, who is the director of the Mexican submission for the Foreign Language Film Award this year, a documentary called Tempestad. And it had been photographed by a young documentary cinematographer named Ernesto Pardo, and he's a new member as well. So this is the kind of thing we've, in every branch, we are reaching out for inclusion and new membership. And it's really reflected in a committee we have called the A2020 Committee, the Academy in the year 2020. And it's committed to increasing our membership around the world. And each of the branch committees, like cinematographers, editors, directors, writers, actors, they're all committed to forming a subcommittee to look at films during the entire year and reach out and see where they think important work is being done. Not necessarily work by people who have been making movies for 30 or 40 years, but important new work as well. So we are opening up, we are actively searching for new membership. So it's important you all know that. So that's one of the kind of things we're doing, very much so. We also have started a new committee, which is in its infancy. It's being chaired by a governor, producer governor named Albert Berger, and it's called the Future of Film. And this committee is really going to be working inside the Academy. It's all about internal changes in governance in the Academy. How are we going to redefine the role and the identity of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in an age where technology is driving so much the creative and aesthetic and formal definition of what a motion picture is? You know, digital and streaming is just one part of it. It's a very, very complicated examination we're going to be doing, and that's something that we are also looking forward to. So these kinds of things, there are just a lot of things going on in the Academy now that represent a real activist and positive approach reaching out.
So you're talking about the Academy is obviously a much broader entity than simply the Oscars. So can you go into what other things the Academy does, from the archive, the museum, how it's helping to shape, in a sense, the industry, not just in the U.S. but also abroad?
John may have to fill in some details. So I think the first thing you asked about was the museum. So we are in the process of building probably one of the world's first museums of motion pictures, and I'm on the museum committee, and it's really extraordinary. I know there's many hundreds of millions of dollars that the Academy has already gotten and has pledged to it. And the presentations that I've seen, we are, going back to the beginning of cinema. Silent, Méliès, how it was originally invented. We're looking, at different countries. We're looking at, different races. We're looking at, gender. And it's pretty amazing for the first time to be able to, we're designing the museum so that you actually walk through it and you experience it kind of as a movie. So it's pretty amazing that we're going to be able to bring all these resources together. And I think that it opens in 2019. And I mean, you can talk a little bit more to it, but I know that we're, it's the history of movies, but us also, we're going to have a lot of cultural events that we end up entertaining people and broadening people's understanding of movies.
The Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, which, as Kimberly said, will open, we hope, in June of 2019, is going to be unlike any other motion picture film museum you've seen. Not only is it going to tell the story of movies in a kind of chronological era, but it's going to be looking back and forth You know, you'll be able to go, say, from Méliès and jump ahead to visual effects in contemporary films. There will be a timeline, but it won't be a strict timeline. And what is going to be really extraordinary about this museum, and we have all of the governors and the executive committees and all the branches consulting with the museum curators and the director of the museum, Carrie Brower. And what we are doing is we are meeting and having strong input about what it is all the different crafts do. Sound executive committee is involved, the visual effects, the documentarians, you know, the cinematographers and editors and production designers. So it is going to be a story or history of motion pictures as framed and defined by the people that actually make the movies and not by just curators and historians. So we're very excited about it. It's an ambitious thing to do, admittedly, and there's a lot of kind of free-flowing of information, and as you can imagine, all of us being filmmakers, we all have very strong ideas and convictions about how we think things should be. If you can imagine a boardroom of 54 governors of the Academy from 17 different branches, all having strong ideas about what they think the Academy Museum should be. It's both exhilarating and kind of chaotic, but chaotic in a very creative and wonderful way.
There is something that I'm really glad that you kind of laid the groundwork for the museum, because I think you're so articulate about that. But one thing I can say, being in these rooms, and as a director, you know, I work with everybody in the film, so it's very exciting to me. Like I do a lot for the Directors Guild of America, and that's great. It's all my director, you know, colleagues. But when I'm at the Academy, what's extraordinary is that it's so interdisciplinary, that I am dealing with sound, I am dealing with cinematography. We're all working together, and that is the beauty of this museum. So, you know, part of falling in love with movies, I think, is falling in love with the content of movies, but also the creation of movies. And so when you understand how sound is created and how it's laid down, when you see it from the cinematographer's point of view, I do think that what's so beautiful about the museum is the ability to continue to share the craft that we love across all the crafts. And, you know, it's not really ever been done, and it's a very experiential thing. So it's going to be extraordinary.
Let me just give you an idea about how we are reaching out and reaching forward. Every November, the Board of Governors gives 3 or 4 honorary Oscars to outstanding filmmakers, honoring their career. This year we included Donald Sutherland, Agnes Varda, American independent film, African-American filmmaker Charles Burnett, and the cinematographer Owen Roizman. Okay, so it was really kind of across, both in terms of gender, ethnicity, race, and kinds of films that they make. It was very, very broad-based. The other thing we did, and this has been kind of controversial inside the Academy, but the Board of Governors got totally behind it. Governor Michael Mann, the director, came to me and he said, "John, there's an installation at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art by Alejandro Iñárritu that was photographed by his collaborator, Chivo Emmanuel Lubezki. They've spent 4 years making it, in between Revenant and Birdman, whenever they had time. It's a virtual reality experience. The center part of it, it's a 3-stage experience. And it's an environment that you walk into, and you are immersed in a real-life 3-dimensional experience in a room that's like in an antechamber. And then you go into this huge room, and it's about twice the size of this, for a virtual reality experience, and there's sand on the floor. And you take your shoes off, and it's cold in there. It's like nighttime in the desert. They put a headset on you, and you are immersed in a 7.5-minute experience where you are with a group of illegal migrants crossing the border from Mexico into the American Southwest desert. It's unlike any virtual reality experience you've ever seen. You know, I said there's one outside here where people sit in chairs with a headset. No, this thing, you're in the middle of the room, there's an umbilical cable you have behind you that is as thick as a fire hose. There's so much data that goes through it. And you are there, it starts, and you are free to move anywhere in that room you want. The data going through is unbelievable, and you are totally immersed in the 7.5-minute experience. And when it's over, you move into a third part of it, which is video showing the actual migrants that were the actors in the film. Anyway, long story about it, but it is absolutely an experience that is unlike anything you've seen in terms of virtual reality, which we still consider to be maybe the future in its infancy. The Board of Governors decided, after we had all seen this experience, that this was so groundbreaking and so new that we gave it a special Academy Award. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of traditional people in the Academy, people my age especially, who say, well, wait a second, that's not a movie. Well, as I mentioned, Albert Berger is forming this committee. What is a movie? What is a motion picture? You know, I'm sure all of you have seen some virtual reality and have a hint of what this and maybe future technologies can be. You know, so it's something that we really need to be looking at. And the Academy, we feel, is at the vanguard of being open to this kind of experience.
Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of how membership works. You said that there are committees that you're exploring who to nominate. How does that nomination process work? Who nominates people? What is what do they go through?
Yeah, sure. So that's another one of the things that we do that is so exciting, is that we are constantly looking for new members. And I've had the rare and fortunate experience, I think I've been in now since '08, so that's probably 9 years, of being in these rooms as we've chosen new members. And the great thing is I've seen the Academy hear the cultural changes that are going on and continue to push in terms of expanding people from different genders, nationalities, sexual preferences, you know, religions, not only domestic but also foreign. So when we're in these rooms, which is really great, we get, you know, amazing recommendations of filmmakers that, you know, some that we've heard of, and we say, oh my God, they should be a member. They're so brilliant and we want to support them. So then we all, you know, vote on that and debate about it. But oftentimes there's lists of people that we haven't heard of. And then we go out and we see their movies and we debate about it. And what's been really exciting is just this deep desire to continue to grow internationally and to bring in voices from all over. And it's changing the nature of the rooms, the kind of decision making that we're making, the kinds of discussions that we're having. You know, the more voices that you include while continuing to preserve the excellence of the Academy, it's really exciting. Sure. In terms of... Yeah, so Haifa Al-Mansour, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. A favorite of yours, yes, and one of your own, is extraordinary. So she's a new member, and we run a panel with her here. And she represents part of that kind of new voice. She's a woman. She's a great filmmaker. You know, she's from your region. So it's great to have her voice in there. And so she did, you know, an event with us. We're also looking at just kind of the entire region, who we can be educated about so that we can bring them in, so that they have a voice and help to shape the future of the Academy.
I'd just like to say something about Anya Svarda. I had the delightful duty after the Board of Governors decided who the 4 honorary Oscars were going to this October, of calling Anya Svarda. And I was well aware of Agnes's work from the very beginning. I mean, when I was a film student, I had seen her first feature, La Pointe Courte, which was like a Nouvelle Vague film from 1956. It was 5 years before, you know, Breathless and The 400 Blows. So I was keenly aware of her work, both as a feature filmmaker and especially as a documentarian. And so I was able to call her and say, Agnes, you know, the Academy is going to give you an honorary Oscar. And she said, oh, I thought the Oscars were in February. And I said, yeah, but this is going to be in November, and it's a special Oscar. These are honorary Oscars the Board of Governors give. She didn't quite get it, and she said, well, you know, I'm coming to Los Angeles in October because my new film that I did with JR, Visage Village, Faces Places. Is that showing here, I think? No? Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, you must see it. She said, I have to come to Los Angeles in October to promote the film. Can't you give the Academy Award to me then? Well, she said, I don't want to come twice. So I said, well, I'll see what I can do, Agnes, but I don't think we can do that. You know, the date's kind of been set. So I hung up, and a half hour later, her daughter Rosalie called me, and she said, John, don't worry, Mom will be there. Yeah. And she came, and it was absolutely delightful to see this woman. She's 89 years old. She's been given awards by every film festival and institution around the world you can think of, including, I think she's won the Palme d'Or twice, once honorary and once, anyway, incredible award. But she's never had an Oscar. And the day after we gave it to her, the French consulate had a garden party in their home in Beverly Hills, and so I was invited. And suddenly Agnes, who was kind of poo-pooing this Oscar, she was being photographed all over the garden holding it with all of her friends. It was amazing. So the fact that the Academy gave this extraordinary woman, this 89-year-old woman, this Academy Award is kind of the capstone to, you know, a life's work, and to see how much it meant to her finally as a sense of being recognized by the Hollywood community. And this is what we're trying to do. We really want to let everybody in the world know, all of our filmmakers, you know, understand that we're with you, we're committed to you, and we're all part of the same community.
Very nice. Kim, you were talking about how increased diversity changes the conversation, changes the discussions. How does it also possibly change the selection, the shortlist for the Foreign Academy Awards? Do you think it's becoming more diverse? It's because the selection itself, because of the new members?
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit to it, but John really is an expert, obviously, on that. Yeah, I mean, I think the moment that, and I've seen it, you know, historically, when you're in the room, I mean, look, the great thing about the Academy for me is it's all these colleagues who just love movies and are so skilled at them and so educated about them. So I've been in a room with Catherine Bigelow, you know, because what happens is, like, the directors, this isn't the foreign film, but when we're getting to new members, you know, in particular, you know, we look to each other to educate one another about other filmmakers. And, you know, she just happens to be just a cinephile. And so, you know, Catherine can tell you, oh, I was just at this festival and I just saw this film, and this director is amazing. And, you know, she really was very knowledgeable about the international filmmakers. And it really helped us expand the ranks in our membership to bring in great directors. So I would imagine you jump over, I mean, John can speak specifically, but, you know, looking at foreign films, the bottom line is there are so many films out there. So the point is we have to get eyes on as many of them as we can, but they have to be informed, and then we have to bring those back, and we have to share that knowledge with one another, because as far as I understand, no single person could see all the movies that we get. So we have a system whereby you see some of them, somebody else sees some of them, and we discuss them, and we get excited about them, and then we begin to, you know, winnow it down to an amount that we actually can see, and then we all can vote on. So I happen to have been shooting, I've long wanted to be part of the this committee, but I've been shooting a lot, and so in particular, I was going to miss the first round. I was actually away in Vancouver, and I was really, you know, upset about it, but it was great. John was like, well, hopefully you'll come in and you'll see the next set. So he can talk about what they first start with, but we end up with like 9. And I'm like, that's great. So it's going to be this fascinating weekend where you just watch, I think, all 9 of the films, you know, with your colleagues, and that's what you do for the weekend. And it's so exciting that we are taking films in. We've always done this, but from around the world. Just those voices, you know, the new ideas. It's just, I love the foreign film, so I'm very moved by it. But you can speak specifically to some changes that are going on. Yeah,
to Kimberly's point about being able to see all of the films, Well, up until maybe 2 years ago, there were actually members on the executive committee of the Foreign Language Film Award that did see all of the films, and I'm talking about 60, 65 films. Every year, the number keeps increasing. The Academy started to give a Foreign Language Film Award as an every-year event in 1956 with Fellini's La Strada, and it's been every year since then. Every year, the number of countries submitting increases. This year, 92 countries submitted films, and I must say, even our most dedicated member, I don't think saw all 92 of them. I certainly did, and I was traveling a lot, but I did see about 35 of them. And so what happens is there is a general committee, the way it's structured. Anybody that lives in the Los Angeles, Southern California area that can come and see them screened on the large screen can sign up for the committee. And that's the pool. We have over 2,000 members in Los Angeles area. And this year, over 600 signed up, which is, I don't know how many of them will finally qualify, but 600 signed up. So that's a real commitment. And they need to see 15 or 16 of the 92 films. And there is a way that they're rated, not on the number of people that see them, but on the ratings within the number of people who see them, okay? So tomorrow night is the last screening of the films. Two are shown tonight. There is a Vietnamese film, and the other film, oh gosh, I can't remember what the other, do you know what it is, Lorenza? It's a Vietnam film, and it's one that's very highly anticipated, and I can't, the Hungarian film, which is called something Body and Soul or something. I can't remember the title of it. Anyway, those are showing tomorrow night. And then the members of that committee will turn in their ballots. They will pick 6 films, the 6 highest rated films from that group that votes. On Thursday, a smaller executive committee will meet of people that have been invited and who have seen a large number of the films. They will pick 3 more films. So that will give us a short list of 9 films, okay, which essentially represent the second phase. Those 9 films will then be screened in middle of January on large theatrical, screening in San Francisco for all the San Francisco members that want to see them, in New York and in London. They'll be shown 3 a day over a 3-day weekend. And what is really exciting about this is because previous to this year, it had been a small invited group that would see these films in those 3 cities. This year, we're opening it up to members in all of the members in those cities if they sign up and make that commitment. The other thing we're doing, since this is the international award, the Foreign Language Film Award, for the first time, all members that live outside of the UK and the United States will be able to sign up in the same way, 3 films a day over the 3-day period, streaming. They will be able to see all 9 films and vote on the 5. Okay, so when those cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, and London, and all the international members have had a chance to vote, they will vote on the 9 films, and the 5 nominated finalists will be chosen. So it's going to be much more expanded this year. And not just in terms of the American members and the English members that get to see them, but around the world.
And I just want to comment, which I think is extraordinary, and I do want to celebrate what John has brought to the Academy. We've had so many great presidents, but in particular to have somebody, as we like to say, do you call it just a creative? Is that what you would say the difference would be? Because you're a cinematographer. Yeah. You had a term, right? But the idea that we actually have somebody who loves crafts. Okay. Call us crafts. I think of creatives, but okay. But somebody who loves cinema so much, who knows so much about film, who's worked in the industry so long, who's cared about the Academy for so long. What I see happening, which is extraordinary, is you have this institution or this club that has done things a certain way for a long time, and that's been very successful for it. And that's why it has the kind of respect that it has around the world and why it draws the kind of people in that it draws in, right? But it has felt the pressure in a good way that it needs to expand and it needs to grow and it needs to reach out to more people. So I think that there's an inherent challenge, which is very interesting, of how does one retain what they are and what they are good at and their identity while they expand? So what you just said is extraordinary to me. Think of all these cities that the Academy is able to create these screenings in. So we've now looked at all these films around the world. Hopefully we've done a good job in culling them down by seeking all this input. We're now going to go to these different cities and show them. And I do believe it's something very new that we're going to stream it. And you would have to understand there would be a resistance to the danger of screening something, right? We have to protect these movies, but there's such a desire to grow that now we're going to get input from people around the world on these movies, and that's part of what I am talking about in the rooms things are changing, is because we're continuing to include smart and diverse voices.
I'd like to open up the panel now to the audience. Are there any questions that come up right now? Yes. Can we have a microphone here?
Thank you very much. This question is for Mr. Bailey. You'd mentioned a sort of a vision for the Academy for 2020. And it's curious when you mentioned that, I remembered the great French director Jean-Pierre Melville in about 1970 predicted that the cinema had about half a century left in it. My question is twofold. First, do you agree with that? And B, and the more difficult question is, could it be argued that not only has the Academy existed in the bubble, but that Hollywood, as a sort of a factory of fascination that has gripped the world throughout the 20th century, much of the 20th century, as the form is sort of entering its winter years, is clamoring for a kind of a credibility internationally, considering that over the decades, not only has it been American-centric and English language-centric, but has often celebrated the form, that being the Academy, I wouldn't say strictly along rigid lines, but typically narrative fiction, 90 to 120 minutes, often along generic lines. So I guess the question is, how is it that you assert your relevance and your credibility to an international audience that's been accustomed to not only a Hollywood that produces American cinema, American-centric cinema, arguably for the world, but also an Academy that has predominantly celebrated English language and American production?
What was it you said that Jean-Pierre Melville said?
Oh, he had an interview in 1970 where he predicted that the cinema had about half a century left in it, so 2020.
Half a century left. Okay, well, that's interesting. Well, Melville was kind of a prophet. I love Melville. I mean, especially some of his later films, where he kind of got more outside the literal homage to American film noir. Samurai is a film that I've seen many, many times. Well, a lot of people have been talking about the death of cinema for a long time. I did 5 films with the writer-director Paul Schrader. In 2005, he wrote a kind of, what can I say, a kind of funereal piece for Film Comment magazine, where he chose 50 films in the history of cinema that he felt defined the era of filmmaking, because he said cinema is over. He said, we will continue to make movies, but cinema as an art is over. Well, I love Paul, but I think he was dead wrong. I mean, I'm seeing several dozen films every year just in the foreign language area. Plus, I think still some very important American films, a few studio films, and certainly a lot of independent films. I think that cinema is very much alive. In terms of the notion of Hollywood being Anglo-centric, there are several perspectives on that. The reality is, in the entire history of filmmaking, from the silent days on, Hollywood has devoured and absorbed the best of talent from around the world. I mean, you go back to the silent era and you see all the great German expressionist filmmakers that were sucked out of the Weimar Republic and went to Hollywood, like, like Fritz Lang, like Murnau. Some of them had incredibly distinguished careers. Robert Siodmak, Billy Wilder. I mean, so many of them, they became identified as American filmmakers, but they were all really from different parts of the world. So that continues on. I mean, look at, what we call the Mexican Tres Amigos, Del Toro, Iñárritu, and Cuarón, all of whom made incredible films in Mexico. And what happened? We brought them to Hollywood. Now, they weren't forced at gunpoint to go to Hollywood. There are reasons they went to Hollywood. I hope they go back and continue to make films in their home countries. There have been great filmmakers that have tried to come to Hollywood or have made English language films, like Truffaut with Fahrenheit 451, and he realized this is not something he could do. When Robert Benton and David Newman wrote the script for Bonnie and Clyde, who was their first choice of director? Jean-Luc Godard. Okay, Godard wouldn't touch it. Then they went to Truffaut. Truffaut wouldn't touch it. So they ended up with Arthur Penn. But anyway, that is a reality. I mean, I don't think you can escape the fact that Hollywood, American cinema, is a colossus. The thing that I find so exciting is that there are filmmakers from around the world that are now starting more and more to achieve and maintain stronger and stronger identity within their own culture, and are starting to be recognized, just not by Hollywood, but by their filmmakers around the world, and that they don't have to come to Hollywood to be validated. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
And I just want to jump into the whole idea of the death of cinema. As you were saying, we have this, group of people, Albert Berger's leading it, when we're asking ourselves, and I was on the original part of the committee till I had to go and shoot, what is cinema? What is television? Where is this all going? And for me, at least, I can say, having listened to a lot of these discussions, it's very exciting that we don't know. It's very exciting that the death of something is happening, but also the birth of something else is happening. It's extraordinary to me, that we now are working in what we would call cinema and film. A lot of us are still making movies, but we're also shooting what you might call television, but I wouldn't even call it television. It's now called OTT, over the top. Anything that comes in over the top of your television. And do you know what's amazing? I love a 3-act structure. I do love 90 to 120 minutes, and not because it's generic and it's what it's been, but, back to Aristotle's time. It's just like that's how human beings experienced entertainment. That's how long it took before we had to pee. It kind of is still how long it takes. And that really means something. Like when you sit and when you edit a movie, you watch it to see where your attention span goes. So that is a beautiful segment of entertainment, that length. And that's something that we wonder, does that constitute a movie? Does a movie have to be projected? These are things that we're asking. But at the same time, the very same people who are making movies right now are all operating in this other venue. So we're making things of all different lengths. It's showing in all different places. Is it cinema? We don't know. The beautiful thing is it's causing a level of anxiety, but we're asking it, and we're still creating. So I think that the question is being asked and answered all the time. I would say secondarily, it's very interesting what he said about all these international filmmakers coming to Hollywood. Yes, they have historically done that, and that now they maybe don't have to. But at the same time, while Hollywood may be Anglo-centric, I think what's very interesting is that you have, the African-American Black experience being put very much on screen. Look at Moonlight. Look at what Ryan Coogler's doing. Look at what Steve McQueen is doing. These are profound stories that, yes, they are American, but they're a different side of America than we've ever seen. The same thing with gender and sexuality. You have queer people, you have women making movies, and they end up, making it into the Hollywood system. And I think the last thing is, because a lot of my friends talk about this notion of Hollywood as if there is a Hollywood. Hollywood is fascinating. I'm not from Hollywood, I'm from New York City. So, but what's interesting is there is no monolithic culture in Hollywood. It is people who, for whatever reason, love making content. They come there, they make it in all different ways. It's always reshaping itself. And I don't know that people know that, so.
In terms of Kimberly's point about we don't know where we're going. And, if you look at the history of filmmaking, that's true from the very beginning. One of the things that's so incredible about cinema is its whole identity keeps shifting with the change in technology. Every piece of new equipment changes the way we make films. You know, the introduction of color, real color with 3-strip Technicolor in the mid-30s. The use of very sophisticated cranes, single-strip color in 1950. The revival of 3D in the 50s. Lightweight cameras and super speed emulsions that contributed to cinema verite, direct cinema, and the Nouvelle Vague working together, which had an influence in America and created the new American cinema. The introduction of Steadicam when I was a camera operator. And I was a camera operator on Days of Heaven, and we used an early Steadicam for sequences in that film. The technology is constantly changing what a movie is. And one of the things that's interesting about Albert's committee, you know, the future of film, is while we're trying to look at it and say, what is film today, so that we can start to define what it may become, it's changing under our very gaze. We can't keep up with it. The technology is so fast. When we were looking at and discussing Iñárritu's Carne y Arena, the virtual reality installation, we had almost all the governors there. It was a beautiful meeting. And it was one of those meetings that doesn't happen too often. Usually when the Board of Governors meets, we talk about governance, about rules, about business, budget. That Saturday morning, we talked about movies and the future of movies and what is a movie, and it was exhilarating. The discussion went around the room, and it became very clear that contrary to what I thought, almost all the governors were excited and supportive and enthusiastic about giving the special Oscar to Carne y Arena. So it goes around, and there was a new governor. He is an animator. Big, tall guy, big, weighs like 350 pounds, and blonde and big. You know, he looks like a cartoon character himself. His name is Tom Cito, and he's very quiet. He's a gentle giant. So everybody had talked, and finally Tom raised his hand, and I recognized him. He said, you know, for 120 years, we have defined movies as a machine that throws pictures onto a sheet. He says, Carne y Arena got rid of the sheet. And there was this dead silence in the room. Because yes, it's still a movie, but it's a movie that's happening right in front of you on this headset. And you're in it, and you alter the space yourself. But it's 7.5 minutes long, and I saw it twice. The first time I saw it, I kind of stood back in the middle of the room and watched it happen around me. I'd turn around. The second time, they asked me to see it a second time. I decided I'm going to become part of this movie. And I started moving around the room, getting perspective like I was a moving camera myself. It's like walking through a real set or something. And they put a backpack on you, and there's a guide there because you don't see the walls, of course. And when you get close to the walls, they pull you back. Well, they were pulling me back all the time. I was running around the room without even realizing it. When it ended, and the screen went black, or the helmet went black, I realized I was flat on my stomach on the ground because a guy had been pointing a machine gun at me. And I got up and, I was just covered in sand and dirt. That's the kind of movie I'd never seen before. But that's part of the future. And a lot of stuff that's going to be happening in the next decade, we don't have any idea what it's going to be. But it's exciting. So you can't tell me that, due respect to Jean-Pierre Melville, cinema is not dead.
Hi, my name is Natalie Habib, and I'm an executive producer in an animation studio. So we're more related to animation filmmaking. My question is more about the background of the Academy and its support, and not so much about the awards and all of that, because that's all great. That's the end of the line. The experience is making the film. And internationally, a lot of filmmakers have been struggling in getting their ideas through in film because predominantly of one main factor, which is financing and funding. And a lot of times, all of this financing and funding seems to be very concentrated within certain markets, like the US market, whether it's Hollywood or beyond. I was wondering whether the Academy, since it's becoming far more, wider and being inclusive of so many filmmakers and so many different countries and their contribution to film, whether there's going to be a role that's going to be played in not just sharing the experience of the award or the experience of the education that one can get from being a member, but will there be ways of also benefiting from trying to get more financing into the films that we're trying to make? Because one of the main impediments that we're facing on an international level is getting that kind of financing, and it seems that the numbers that we see for movies being made out of the US or the UK versus movies being made out of different parts of the world have a very big difference and gap. So I was wondering whether the Academy will also play a role in supporting that part of filmmaking and not just the part of the education and obviously the exposure that a filmmaker can receive. I hope that my question is pertinent at this level.
Well, all I can say is the Academy does not make movies. We don't produce content, not a content provider. So that's about all I can say in terms of answering your question. However, the other point of this is, I don't think you want Hollywood movie, an American commercial mainstream movie, or the studios or American producers, with all due respect to them, essentially telling you how to make your movies. I mean, we as American filmmakers have enough problems with the creative control of our movies. I think certainly you in the international community don't need a bunch of Hollywood producers telling you how to make your movies just because they give you money. Well, but they will. If they give you money, they will. I could name a very big Hollywood producer who is now a persona non grata, who essentially, they called him Harvey Scissorhands. Every picture he ever got a hold of with his company, he changed. Some really artful films he ruined.
Hi, this is for John Bailey. What steps are you taking, or have you taken, to avoid last year's mishaps at the Oscars? What steps have you taken to avoid last year's mishap at the Oscars?
What steps are being taken to avoid last year's mishap at the Oscars?
We're bringing Warren and Faye Dunaway back. They're very excited about coming back.
I meant with the envelopes.
As a matter of fact, there's a new promo that's out that's playing on American network television, and it kind of has highlights from some of the Oscar shows, and it shows them. And so it's the Oscars making fun of ourselves at the accident that happened. And I can tell you, from ABC, the television corporation that broadcasts the Oscars, ABC was not unhappy. This was a great publicity stunt for them.
What we're doing, no, I mean, it just culturally, I can just say it was fascinating because John was at the ceremony and I was watching it on screen, and it was amazing for me, first time in my life, because I'm so used to the Oscars being perfect, and the show, is so well done, and that's what entertainment is, and to just be stopped dead in my tracks and just be like, oh my God, what is happening? And it was so exciting, and we all kept rewinding it, and it ended up, as you say, what are we doing to avoid it? I don't know. It's like I said, it generated so much interest, and it really kind of took you behind the scenes for a moment to the notion that, it's a show, and it's produced, and entertainment goes on,
It's live television, which is a very rare thing. As a matter of fact, one of the things I want to do, I'm trying to convince the producers to do this, because my own feeling is that the show, the telecast show, and I know in most of the world you see a very slimmed down version of it. You see a 90-minute version, which doesn't acknowledge all the crafts awards. It's just the writing, producing, directing, acting. But, the whole show runs like more than 3.5 hours, and I wish there were a longer version internationally. But what I want to do this year, in terms of acknowledging the retrospective 90-year history of cinema, where we show behind the scenes how movies were made with camera crews and lighting and grips and dollies and things like that, I want the show to reflect a little bit of that. I want it not to be all perfect, where you see just these swooping crane shots and all this stuff and the presenters coming out, and I want to see all that, but I want to have several cameras photograph the cameras that are photographing them. It's kind of like breaking the proscenium. Now, whether the producers will let me do that or not, but you know, the show has been too perfect. It's too choreographed. And I think that especially young people would like to see some of the creaks and the nuts and bolts in the machine. So we'll see what happens.
Hi, I have a fantasy question. My name is Inji. I have a fantasy question. My name is Inji Muhyiddin. I'm an Arabic script writer. One of my dreams to win an Oscar one day. So the question is, would the Academy specialize script writing, directing, or cinematography Oscars for foreign languages?
If I understand the question, if I understand the question correctly, you're asking, do we anticipate the possibility of expanding the awards to not just best foreign film, but best foreign director, best foreign script? But
May I venture? I don't know. I think it's an excellent question, and I don't speak for the Academy. I just speak as a person who's watching all this unfold. It seems to me, perhaps, as the number of foreign entries expand, as foreign presence expands, that is a very natural question. That a kind of celebration of other aspects of the filmmaking process from the international participation, it would make sense to me. But that's just me. And that's him.
Well, I mean, in concept, any movie that qualifies as almost 400 movies that make the eligibility list are available for nominations in all categories. I don't think that the Academy, already with a 3.5-hour television show, is going to have another whole category for international awards for the crafts and things like that. But the reality is, if you look at the history, especially, not so much the actors, because they do tend to be predominantly Anglo in terms of the actors, certainly. But if you look at the crafts, there have been production designers, composers, cinematographers, editors from around the world that have won Academy Awards. When I was in the Morelia Film Festival a few months ago, Gregory Nava and I did a program where we, honored all of the Mexican film artists that had won Academy Awards, and there were a fair number of them going back to the 30s. So that's very true. I mean, especially as a cinematographer, I think during the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, a number of international cinematographers won the Academy Awards. Sven Nykvist, for example. Nestor Almendros, who I worked with. A lot of the English, David Watkin, won an Academy Award for Out of Africa. I think, was it either Sacha Verney or I think it's Guylaine Cloquet for Roman Polanski's film Tess won an Academy Award. So, I mean, it's possible. And in the last 3 years, the Cinematography Award has been won by Mexicans. By Chivo, who won 3 years in a row, as a matter of fact.
If it's a brief question, sorry, because we're almost out of time. So if it's
My question is an extension from what I'm going to say to Kimberly, because of the fact that you've opened up the platform for independent filmmakers such as myself to know that you can start a movie on a small budget and garner so much attention. Obviously, I'm referring to Boys Don't Cry, and also the inclusion of LGBT community and
people from different races, ethnicities, and religions. My fear is that with the inclusion now, I'm a Saudi American filmmaker, with the current inclusion, because of all the hashtags and the issues with like Twitter and people getting all angry that there's always Anglo or white or etc., is this inclusion just going to be temporary and just like eventually plateau, or is it something that's going to like garner more advancement? So what is, regardless of the Vision 2020, what is the efforts that are going to be made to include more people in the academy and make sure that they don't also become a plateau? So you've included Haifa Mansour, but then what if in 10 years from now, it's going to be difficult to include new people? The idea is like, is it just something that's just a facade that's going to happen now, or will it be that the academy will always be inclusive and not just wait for like some sort of a whiplash or people getting angry?
I think it's an excellent question, and I'll answer it first, then I think John should. It's the notion of, is there something temporary and perhaps ephemeral, right? Is there something ephemeral about us opening things up? Is that what you're saying? Well, it's very interesting. You can't take down the master's house with the master's tools, right? So if in A2020, and I'm actually head of the diversity committee for the director's branch, so I'm proudly going to go out there and, you know, excitedly look at all these films and open up the ranks, you know, to membership. But think about it this way. A, the world is opening up. So America itself is facing this, that it has to be more internationally minded, right? It also, in terms of its own history, has to look at race in a way that it hasn't. It has to own up to its history, you know, with African Americans. It has to open up to LGBTQ. It has to open up to other voices simply because commerce demands it, right? It makes more money, and because history demands it. So it's happening in our culture anyway. So that's where that pressure is coming from. If by A2020 we end up diversifying, and I know we will because I've watched us for years do this, and like I said, I've been there for 9 years. It's not happening overnight. But the most important thing is when you include, it's strange that it's the word diverse, but when you include more voices, when you include these voices that haven't been heard before, it changes the discussion in the room. Think about that. You actually change the DNA and the constitution of the very organization by bringing in more people. Once you bring those people in, hopefully those people are fighting for quality, but those people also probably, they do see the world differently because they live it differently. So your African American, your international, your women, your LGBTQ, they're going to continue to expand the kinds of people that you bring in and the kinds of films that you see. And the wonderful thing about the entertainment business is we're voracious. We want the new thing. We want the moving thing, right? And that's why people of color, international stories, women are being consumed more, because I think people are hungry for the thing that they haven't yet seen. So I think de facto, it exponentially increases. That's my sense. I'm curious what you think.
No, I think that's beautifully put, Kimberly. And, you know, it's not a facade. This is real. And if we haven't made that clear to you in the past hour, then we failed miserably. Okay?
People are scared.
You know, we are deeply committed to this, you know, and as you know, as physical borders shrink in terms of us being able to have things like these film festivals, we are all going to become part of a more closed community. I mean, I understand what's happening in the United States now. We have a 19th century robber baron, unbridled capitalist, you know, occupying the Oval Office of the White House. But that's not what the American people are, you know. And I think everything Kimberly has said is very much to the point. I mean, I speak not just for myself as a lover of international films, but of so many people in the Academy. And when we say the Academy, we're talking about 8,400 people now, you know, and there are huge numbers of them. There are only 2,000 of them that live in Hollywood. That's less than a quarter. We have members around the world.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So thank you very much, Kimberly Peirce, John Bailey. Thank you very much for coming.